There we go. And it's important to recognize I do have two co-authors for this presentation, Mason Ryan and Chad Rupke of the Arizona Game and Fish, very much a part of the analysis. And I should always just mention my wife Elizabeth has been a stalwart field assistant through all of these studies. So 10 years of radio tracking is what will be summarized here today, and I'm going to go fast and furious just to hit the highlights of what we found to give you a picture of the annual activity cycle of this lizard, and radio tracking via a little backpack arrangement of a transmitter, and we just simply super glue it onto the back. We tried harnesses and various things that got in the way of the everyday life of the lizards and realized just a dab of super glue causes it to affix quite well, and it simply is sloughed off each time they shed their skin, which for adults is once in the spring and once in the fall. So simply have to catch them again and reattach. Now, when I started this work roughly 15 years ago, and then the last 10 years radio tracking, I had the impression of Phrynosoma solare that was given to me by Chuck Lowe, and I'm sure most of you in the room know him, the preeminent herpetologist or natural historian, I would even say, in the Southwest from 1950 to 2000, and his legacy lives on with us. But in his early work, he did happen to work on this lizard, and these are a couple of quotes from his paper that I would say provided what became the accepted view of the natural history, that this lizard is particularly sedentary in spite of its relatively large size relative to other horned lizards. And a couple of subsequent workers agreed with Chuck in this assessment. And if you go away with anything today, it's the recognition that it ain't necessarily so. We're going to discover, as we did over these 10 years, they move much more than we thought, in spite of the fact that they can be inactive for up to 6 months of the year as adults. Now, this reinforced my view of what's happened to me as a herpetologist over the 50 years I've been doing this, and in spite of having worked with some animals in the absence of radio telemetry, when I would have told you I knew them as an animal, I realized if I radio tracked them, I did not. Radio tracking completely changes your perception, whether it's a chuckawalla, a Gila monster, or a regal horned lizard. Completely opened my eyes to a whole world that we had been missing in the absence of what you get by radio tracking them. And I don't mean radio tracking and going out once a week or much less, getting it from satellite downloads. I mean that you use the tag simply to find the animal so you can then observe what it's doing. So we radio track our lizards every other day, and that's how we become intimately aware of their natural history. And in fact, I don't even gather data on what's going on at the site the way my colleagues at Game and Fish will gather 20 different environmental variables each time they see an animal. But then they turn around and walk away. And again, I don't mean to be in any way denigrating that approach, but I was using the tag in order to be able to observe them. Good news is, didn't have to clip off a toe or insert a pit tag because the spotted pattern on the ventral surface gives you all you need to identify individuals. As long as you're working with about 20 or fewer each season, split them into males and females, it's very easy to keep track of these patterns, and they're stable from hatchling to adult. That's a female 3 years apart, and she has the exact same pattern. You just have to focus on the umbilical scar and pick a few dots, and you can quickly compare photos and know which animal you've recaptured when the tag falls off. Now, this is the take-home message for what we have decided this horned lizard's annual cycle looks like. 5 periods, or seasons, but we like to call them periods. We're going to start with brumation, overwintering, then what we call post-brumation recovery. They emerge, don't move a lot, they feed, they shed. And that's a prelude to their real activity, periods 3 and 4, mating for males, nesting for females. And this is key to the monsoon. And then there's a pre-brumation recovery period when, again, they don't move as much and everyone's feeding on ants as much as they can to replenish their energy reserves that have been depleted by all the activity. So let's take a look at what observations caused us to conclude this is a good way to divide up the year for the Regal horned lizard. So this is a creosote, a couple of burr sages on either side. This is an overwintering site, and there is a horned lizard in that red circle. If we zoom in, I hope you can see the tag in the center there. That's what every overwintering Phrynosoma solari looked like for the 10 years that we followed them. Now, we only end up with roughly 30 animals over that 10-year period that we follow for the entire winter, right? Because we've got to hope that the radio tag lasts the entire winter. But in any case, that's during a wet year. You can see the animals just shimmied into the debris at the base of that creosote. You'll get a better look in the next one. This is a dry year, and there it's quite obvious, I hope. The antenna is going across there from right to left, and you can barely make out the tag. That animal is just, again, shimmied into the debris at the base, and that's as deep as they go. That animal did not move for 6 months. As far as we could tell, didn't even twitch. Occasionally, animals do move from one shrub to the other, but fewer than 40%. They make one move and they reposition themselves at a different shrub. Who knows what changed to cause them to do that. But in any case, it's amazing how exposed they are relatively. And out of the two common shrubs, make up 90% of the shrubs at our site, burr sage and creosote. Burr sage on the left there, creosote on the right. They pick burr sage at a rate greater than its availability. So statistically, they appear to prefer the smaller, denser shrub. Perhaps it affords more protection for them overwintering. This is just a summary. Again, we had just over 30 animals all told. Males, 195 days of this brumation, quiescent behavior under a shrub. Females, less so, but still 182 days. Males begin going down now. This should also cause you to rethink, hibernation and why we think brumation should be considered different, and why you recognize ectotherms are not necessarily hibernating or brumating because the temperature has changed. Clearly, that's not the case for Phrynosoma solari. They could be as active as they wanted to be year-round, right? Except for the especially cold months, December and January. It wouldn't be too hard to be able to bask and get to their body temperature preferred of about 39 degrees Celsius, but they don't. It can last from September to June, generally at the base of burr sage. Our hypothesis, that I don't have time to go into in great detail here, but it's a simple one. We think it's because their primary prey species, the rough seed harvester ant, is a monsoon active ant. Its entire life history, the ants, keyed to the monsoon. And they are inactive for roughly the 6 months of the winter that our horned lizards are inactive. Okay, now quickly, what are the other periods? Post-brumation, emergence, and recovery. Remember, April and May, there are some animals that are continuing to brumate, but some have emerged. The end of March, first week of April are our earliest emergences in typical years for adults. Hatchlings are a different story. They feed, don't move all that much, just enough to get to the nearest active nests, which are only active occasionally. So they aren't able to feed like they will be in the summer. But they then shed, and we think are prepared for the summer activities. But before we get there, here's the rough seed harvester ant. If anyone in the room been stung, bitten by the Pagonomyrmex rugosus, has the most potent venom of any of the Hymenoptera in the Southwest, I've been told, and I would certainly have to agree with that assessment, having experienced it a few times myself. The large discs of these colonies you're no doubt familiar with. This shot shows it even more so. They about 1 meter across, 25-year lifespan for individual colonies, up to 12,000 individuals at those colonies. Regal horned lizard, here's one at an inactive nest. They'll come and stick their head into the nest opening because occasional ants will, of course, venture there and they can find them, but they much prefer to be getting them off of one of those trunk trails that we saw in the previous slides where they can get them in abundance. They can consume about 200 ants in just under 45 minutes. And that's about the most they can take in a morning. But then they'll do that every morning during the summer months as long as the ants are active. We had one female at one colony consume a total of 1,900 ants in 10 days. And I was talking to the ant specialist at the time because they had thought for some years that these colonies only got up to about 4,000. And I said, how is this possible? And he said, well, we've changed that. It's 12,000. So, good. And they have a very distinctive means by which they stick out their mucus-coated tongue, snap up the ant, no mastication's involved. They swallow them very quickly to prevent being stung or bitten. And it's a quite rapid motion there. They ingest those, and then within 24 hours can pass this very large pellet. I brought a couple that if you wanted to disarticulate them and verify that they're made up entirely of rough seed harvester ants, you can knock yourself out back there at the selection of display items, but they're very large, the largest at least of the North American horned lizards that I've seen north of the border. I've seen some up to almost 70 millimeters in length. And again, during the summer when their prey are available, they are eating nothing but that species, rugosus. In the spring, they will take other prey when these ants aren't available. For example, they'll take carabid beetles and they'll take small caterpillars. But in general, if the ants are available, they stick to this species. Now, mating, June and July. This is when all hell breaks loose for the males. And those are two males. They're in the characteristic lookout posture. We'll see more of this later. But for males, they begin searching for females. And the best way to find additional animals at our site to radio tag when you're wondering, I can't find them, they're too cryptic, they're moving before I get there. What am I going to do? Tag a male in June and you're good to go. One male led me to 6 females in 12 days. So they're your best bet. And notice they don't mind working together. They are not territorial. They don't engage in any agonistic displays toward one another. They only rarely head bob, and females head bob more than males, but males in this case, those are 2 of them, and they don't have any problem being near one another. Now this is the home range of one male in an entire year. That huge movement to the top of the slide and back is a kilometer's distance. And that male made that move in a week's time and returned to his home range. So this is not consistent with what Chuck Lowe had concluded, that they're sedentary, don't move more than 10 or 20 meters from their capture site and so on. Just astounded me when I found, my first venture on such a trek, I assumed I was tracking the predator, right? A little kit fox had my horned lizard in its stomach and I was going to find a kit fox burrow. And here's a male with a female a kilometer from where it started. Now this is a box around all of the movements of all of the animals, males and females, in the primary study site in 1 year. I just want to point out that all of the movements outside of the box are males. So, and you can see some especially large ones, and they all returned to their home range within the box. That one to the lower right, he actually goes off-site to this little I won't call it a model airplane, but radio airplanes. Some of them are bigger than this table these days. Guys are out there flying these things around, and I'd be coming into their airspace, and they'd be yelling, "You can't be over here. I've got my lizard." Anyway, fortunately, just did that a couple of times and came back. This is the lookout posture the males adopt, especially so while doing this. I would get one of our good friends from Tucson, Roger Rep, he said, "Brian, horned lizards don't go on rocks like that." And he said, "It's because you put a radio tag on them." So I had to send him pictures of them without radio tags doing this behavior, but in any case. Even into stumps, here's a male climbed up on a creosote stump, living creosote, and so on. So quite common behavior. They're of course looking for females in order to mate with them. This is post-mating. We'll talk about that in a moment. Here is copulation, which unfortunately is very rarely observed because it's very brief. The 4 copulations I witnessed were all 4 minutes long, plus or minus 10 seconds. And that accords with the literature accounts of copulation durations. So very brief, small male with a large female in that photo, less of a size discrepancy here. If you can make out closely at the bottom there, our lighting's not particularly good here, but in any case, when you're both pancakes, it's hard to juxtapose the cloaca to achieve this, but males do an admirable job. They use their tail typically to curl around, and then it's looped over the female's tail, which is sticking up, if you can make that out. I would try to use the pointer, I guess. There's the female's tail. You can't see that that's a fleshy colored hemipenes inserted into the female, but this is in the midst of copulation. It's over, and this is a different pair. The male here, you can see his right hand is on the female. They maintain physical contact with the female for 2 to 3 hours post-copulation. So mate guarding is the assumption there. And then our next period, nesting, females. And thanks to the work of Tom Van Devender, one of our participants here today, we can conclude that these tunnels, which I had to just look in, I never wanted to disturb them and put a yardstick in there, but they dig a burrow 2 to 3 feet in depth, Tom found. And this is one of our females doing just that. And if Wade was here, I would have given him a shout out, because we know that what this female is doing, who I'd watched construct this nest over the previous day, is guarding the nest. So just as males guard females against copulations with a different male, females guard their nest, and Wade's the one who has determined who they're guarding that against. But they remain at the nest, sitting on where they've backfilled their egg deposit. Here's one that's under a fallen branch there. If we zoom in, you can see her there in the center. Right there. And what Wade's work showed us is they're doing this to protect their nest from potential predators such as Salvador, patch-nosed snake, which we have on our site. And I see these snakes regularly probing the soil, and we do know they're egg-eating snakes when it's available. Turns out that horned lizard, Regal horned lizard especially, is just large enough with tilting and headbutting to dissuade a small snake, like Salvadora, from predating its nest. So we had 23 females that we witnessed the entire shebang of nesting, and some females didn't guard. That was only 2, but majority did. Average was 6 days. Some as long as 2 weeks. So they're not feeding during this time. They're there at the nest. If their nest happens to be in a bit of sun, they're usually against a shrub or in a wash. They might move over into the shade briefly during the hottest part of the day, but they come right back to the nest when it's in the shade. Post-brumation looks like pre-brumation, so we don't need to really talk about that. I want to just wrap it up here with some overall comments about their activity. Home range. Now, this shows 4 years of data for one animal. That was the exception. Vast majority of our animals, we only get a year or 2 out of them. And that's because they only last a year or 2. They are not long-lived animals. Bill Parker in the late 60s postulated that their population turns over 50% every 2 years. Nobody believed him. We look at them, they're bighorn lizards. They've got to live long. We just think they do. Not the case. This was the longest lived animal we had during our study. And I want you to see that its home range was largely overlapping year after year. There's some variation, but in general. And they converge over here at one particular burr sage that it overwintered under 3 years in a row. It's amazing. It was actually outside its main area of activity, but it would cross that little wash and overwinter there each year. This is the one female that we have 3 years worth of data as an adult, and she has largely overlapping home range. This is just a summary of the actual movements. This is the median. on the y-axis there. So you see brumation, it's 0. Males and females, they aren't moving at all, right? During brumation for all intents and purposes. Then emergence might be 5-6 meters a day is our scale here, I should have mentioned. But notice what happens during mating. Females are moving more, they're foraging. Males are looking for females. So the median distance moved per day is 40 meters. That just completely shoots out of the water this notion that they might only move 30 meters in their lifetime. Then we go into nesting. Again, males and females there, red and blue, are largely similar. Likewise, we get into pre-brumation. Females are moving more, I think because they spend more time foraging and males go down earlier. But that's just supporting what I've been telling you. In terms of the actual home ranges, for those of you that are interested, if you just look at the bottom here, it's about 2 hectares for females, and for the 14 males, about 8. So on average, males end up with home ranges that are 4 times larger than females, entirely because of what they do for mate searching. If it was just based on what you need to do to get enough ants, we could just assume females are doing that optimally. Okay, now let's see. I have to my clock 22 minutes, and we are hoping to be done by 25 to leave time for questions. So I'm thinking if I can do it here,